Morning, everyone. Hello, everybody. Thank you. So in recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples' spiritual connection to country and in continuing ACU's commitment to reconciliation, it is customary to acknowledge country as we pass through. Today, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the First Peoples, the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways. We thank them for their continued custodianship. We acknowledge and celebrate the continuation of a living culture that has a unique role in this region and on all campuses of Australian Catholic University. We also acknowledge elders past and present and thank them for their wisdom and guidance as we walk in their footsteps. So thank you. And I'd like to pass over to Professor John Marshall Reeve to introduce our brown bag this morning. Brief intro.
We have Nele Van Doren, sorry if I mispronounced it, Nele Van Doren, to speak to us today. He's come all the way from, maybe as far away from this city as you can get, from Ghent, Belgium. I think if you get a globe, that's about as far away as you can get, along with Arnie, who is also here from Belgium. I don't actually know the title of the talk. We're going to have to find out, but I know that the topic is careful analysis of teachers' motivating styles. And she's going to measure it in lots of ways. She's going to describe it. She'll explain it. And I think she'll tell you where it comes from and the implications, the benefits of an effective motivating style and the cost of an ineffective motivating style. So I think you're going to look at a lot of the different angles on a teacher's motivating style and why it matters.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I'm Nele van Doren, and I'm a PhD student from Ghent University in the research group of sports pedagogy under the supervision of Lene Harens, Katrine Koker, and Sophie Overloon. And our research group is also known as, I hope it works.
Try that. Try that.
Yeah, okay, it works. Our research group is also known as MOVES, or Motivation in Education and Sport. And today I want to talk to you about physical features motivating and demotivating style and how it relates to student outcomes. More specifically, I want to give you an overview of my PhD, what I've been doing for the past few years and what I will be doing in my last year. And that's why I also gave a table that gives an overview of the 5 studies I will be talking about today. And there is an empty box at the end for all your feedback, questions, remarks, thoughts, ideas, because I really want your input today as well to improve my PhD and to prepare myself for my defense next year in December. So please write anything you want to say or think or just want me to think about. Okay, so then let's get into it. My PhD starts from self-determination theory. It's a theoretical framework I use. And I'll start from PE teachers' motivating and demotivating styles. And in SDT, it's stated that a motivating style will satisfy the students' needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And that way they'll be optimally motivated, which will lead them to better outcomes such as students' physical activity. In contrast, when teachers rely on a demotivating style, their needs get frustrated, they are more control motivated or even amotivated, and they will have less optimal outcomes, for instance, be less physically active. And there has already been a lot of research actually on self-determination theory, but my research really tries to go deeper into some of these relations and try to fine-tune some of the ideas. For instance, in my first study, I focused on physical activity during the class. Previous research has already been done on physical activity outside class, but I wanted to investigate a more proximal outcome. But I'll first give you an overview. So these are 5 studies I will be talking about today. No worries, I'll go deeper into each and every one. And the table is just a repetition of what I will be saying, so you don't have to read everything. Okay, then let's start with the first study. So as I mentioned, in my first study, I wanted to examine the relation between the teaching styles, students' motivation, and then their physical activity during the lesson. So in total, 302 students filled in 2 questionnaires, a questionnaire on their PE teaching style and then a questionnaire on their motivation. And they also wore accelerometers on their hip during the lesson. And we've done multi-level SEM analysis to analyze these relations. Okay, for the results, so PE teachers' motivating style was positively related to autonomous motivation and negatively to amotivation, both on student level and class level, which means that when students perceive their teachers to be more motivating, it did not only benefit themselves, but the whole class was more autonomously motivated and less amotivated. In contrast, PE teachers' controlling style was positively related to controlled motivation and amotivation, again on both levels, so for the students and also for the whole class. Now, when it came to motivation and MVPE, we only found a trend towards a significant relation with autonomous motivation. So the more autonomously motivated students were, the more physically active they were during the lesson. And we also found a negative relation between teaching styles and MVPE. So when students perceive the teacher as more controlling, they showed less MVPE during the lesson. So what this study wants to show you is that teaching styles is important, or the motivating style is important for students to be optimally motivated, while when they use a controlling style, should really try not to use that one because it's less good for the motivation. However, when it came to MVPA during the lesson topic was more important. So for ball games, students were more active, for instance, than compared to artistic games such as gymnastics. Okay, for the first study, let's get into the second one. Oh yeah, a little bit of self-promotion. The first study got published. So if you want to read more about it, I can send you can scan the QR code. So yeah. And then for the second study, we use observations. There are already a few observation studies. However, in SDT, there has been a recent trend in which they use a circumflex model, which gives a more holistic view of all the teaching styles. And there wasn't an instrument for that. So that's why we developed new instruments so that it can assess all the styles from the circumflex model. And then we try to relate it again to students' outcomes, which we think is very important. So the needs and their motivation. So yeah, I already explained the research question, but in the sample, there were 65 PE teachers who got videotaped. So then we coded with the new observation instrument, and 889 students filled in 3 questionnaires. Their self-perception of the teaching style, so we can compare self-perceptions with observations. And they also filled in their needs and motivation. And then what we did for the analysis, first we did MDS analysis to see if we could find the model. And then we did reliability analysis because we wanted it to be a reliable instrument as well. And then for the relations, we used multi-level analysis. So I don't know if everybody is familiar with the circumflex model. Maybe put up your hand if you know the circumflex model. A few, but not everybody. So I'll briefly explain it or try to explain it as clear as possible. So this is the circumflex model. So as you can see, it's a circle. There are 2 axes. There is a x-axis that goes from need thwarting to need supporting. So on the left side are the demotivating styles, and on the right side are the motivating styles. Then we have the y-axis, which goes from low directiveness to high directiveness. So with low directiveness, the teachers ask a lot about the students, and they try to take their perspective more into account. But when they are more high directive, then they keep everything themselves. They do everything themselves. So that's more on this side. So you get 4 quadrants: autonomy, support, structure, control, and chaos. And every style gets further subdivided into 2 styles. So you really see here the gradual approach, and it's more seen as a holistic approach. So the first thing we did is, can we replicate this circle with observations? That's what an MDS analysis is for. What does it do? It represents every behavior that we have measured and how it relates to another behavior. So for instance, here we have part of 2, which is offering option choice. So it's behavior we measure. And then you can see here it arrives closer to these behaviors and less close to these behaviors. So we found a pretty good circle, and we did find those 2 axes as well. and the behaviors, every behavior of autonomy, support, structure, control, and chaos was in the intended quadrant. So we did a good job there.
Yes. Did you give your coders a list of behaviours to look for, or did they suggest behaviours that they identified kind of off the top of their head?
And they had a list of all the behaviors, and then they had to code every 5 minutes each behavior on a scale from 0 to 6. So it was not a frequency scale, but potency scale, as you wanted to take SET into account. So you wanted to make sure that, for instance, if they gave choice, it would be it wouldn't be a high score if it wasn't seen as a good choice or a real choice. If it's more a fake choice, then it would be lower, but it would be a 6 if it was actual a good choice. So that was with every behavior. So both have answers. And then we did the multi-level analysis because we were interested in the relation between observed teaching style and their need, satisfaction, frustration, and motivation. So for the participative and tuning, so this is autonomy supportive, they were positively related to need satisfaction, and tuning was negatively related to need frustration. So when teachers were observed to be more participative and tuning, the students reported more need satisfaction and less need frustration. And for motivation, we found positive relation from tuning, guiding, and clarifying with intrinsic motivation. We found the same for identified regulation, but also abandoning and awaiting were negatively related to identified regulation. Interestingly, we found a negative relation from demanding to introjective regulation. We did not find any relations with external regulation. And for amotivation, we saw opposite. So tuning, guiding, and clarifying was negatively related to amotivation, and abandoning and awaiting was positively related to amotivation. So again, what this study wants to show you is that autonomy support and structure, the teachers should try to be more autonomy supported and structuring to the benefits of intrinsic motivation, identified regulation, and less amotivation. Well, we should try to avoid these styles, and then students. Yes.
How come you didn't use the circumplex model to look at the agreement, to look at the this instead of the individual scales?
I don't think I understand the question.
You showed that the observations fit nicely into a circumplex model, and then you abandoned that and went back to the scales in there. If you believe in your circumplex model, shouldn't the circumplex model be the basis of this analysis?
I still don't fully understand what you were trying to say, but what we did is we used the circle just to make sure that what we measured was actually what we measured. And then we used the styles to relate them to their outcomes. So I don't know what you're.
Okay, so the circumplex model is an alternative to a factor structure. It's another factor structure.
Yeah.
And it's saying that this factor structure is not as good as the circumplex. These are two different factor structures. If you're going to argue that the circumplex factor structure is stronger, then shouldn't you be using scores from the circumplex to relate to this, or maybe in addition to this?
But these are scores from the circumplexes. This is calculated from the circle.
How would you
Yeah.
how would you use it? How would you do it differently analytically?
Well, you can generate scores from the circumplex model for each person.
Based on the axes, so
Yeah.
like 2 factors.
Yeah.
Or 4.
Well, you can, the circumplex will, you've got those dots. She's got this, so she has scores for every individual. And so she could relate those scores in this sort of observation and this sort of analysis, rather than just using in addition to, or in just using the scale. So if you really want to push the circumplex model, you should be looking at how well you can predict with the circumplex model as opposed to.
That's indeed a good suggestion, but we didn't do it, but we can definitely.
With this, is this multi-level?
Yeah.
So,
But it's
like,
on class level.
Huh?
So this is aggregated onto, so it's on class level. We didn't have like a class and student because this is only measured on class level.
Okay, so these are class average. So
Yeah.
these are the observations related. That's
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah, again, some self promotion. Why not? Yeah.
So you've got a bunch of questions, right?
Yeah, it's-
Do you happen to measure student reported feature style? So instead we did in the first study, did you measure that?
Yeah.
Not that.
Yeah, I didn't include them now in the slides. Basically, there was between observation, so we compared the observations with the students' perceptions, and we didn't find any relations except for autonomy support. So for a tuning, that was like the only one. But I have to say that the circumflex uses other styles than at that time the CSPE, so the same questionnaire wasn't available yet, so we use another questionnaire. So I think that's why
Which one was the stronger predictor?
that we didn't check. We didn't do analysis with the self-perceptions of the students. But it's a good question. Okay, then we went to the third study because in observations we saw that teachers rely on multiple behaviors during the lesson. So it's not always as easy to say like this teacher is autonomy supportive or this one is structuring, because most of the time they use combinations. They might start with giving them choices, and then during the exercise they give them more feedback. So they like use a bunch of different ones. And that's why we wanted to use the person-centered approach, so we could examine multiple styles at the same time instead of using a variable-centered approach. So the research question was, or what we wanted to examine was differences in student motivation according to those teachers' profiles. So first, we of course had to look for those teacher profiles. We included autonomy, support, structure, and control. There were 673 students who filled in 2 questionnaires, their perception about teaching style and then their motivation. And we performed first cluster analysis to identify its different profiles, and then we did a GOBA analysis to see if there was a difference in student motivation according to that cluster membership. And what did we find? We found 6 different clusters. So first cluster is high in need supportive and low in controlling. Then the 6th cluster is opposite, so low need supportive and high controlling. Then we had all high, so need supportive and controlling, and all low need supportive and low controlling, and 2 that were more in between, so relatively autonomy supportive and a relatively structuring style. It's important to note that for each of the 5 teachers, students were in all of the clusters. So students perceive, even when the student was taught by the same teacher, they perceive their teacher differently. And then we did a GOBA analysis to see if students' motivation differed according to this cluster membership, and that was definitely the case. So when students perceive their teacher to be more or high need supportive and low controlling, they were more intrinsically identified as integrated regulation, so they were more optimally motivated. When their teacher relied more on a controlling style, they were more motivated through external regulation and deregulation. And again, basically when the style was higher and all 3 styles were high, there was more introjective regulation. So again, this study wants to show you that students benefit from teachers who rely on a highly autonomy supportive and structuring and a low controlling style. Okay. Then now let's go into the more interesting part. Yeah, that study is not yet published, so no self-promotion there, but it is under review. However, for the last 2 studies, I cannot present you any results, but I will present the idea of what we want to do, because the data has already been collected, but we're now doing the analysis, so there won't be any results there, but definitely also there your thoughts, feedback, anything we can do differently, we can still do it now. So that's definitely a good idea. So for the 4th study, we want to build upon that first study. So we want to examine relations between teachers' observed demotivating styles and students' motivation and physical activity. And here we want to include more styles. So again, the whole circumflex. Therefore, we have 885 students who filled in the motivation for their motivation for PE during that lesson. They also were, again, physical accelerometers on their hip. and the teaching style is determined by observers. It's the tool we developed for study two. And then the analysis we want to do are multi-level sample analysis. Okay. And then the last study is a longitudinal one. Finally, John Marshall would say a longitudinal study, not a cross-sectional one. So therefore, we want to examine whether teachers' styles on time point 1 predict students' motivation and needs on time point 2. Therefore, we have a bit of a smaller sample, so only 300 students. These students filled in 3 questionnaires: their perception of teaching style, their need satisfaction, and frustration, and their motivation. And the analysis we want to do are double-weighted multi-level SAM analysis. However, we looked at them a bit yesterday, and as the sample size is quite small, it's really difficult to get a good fit. So we're trying to explore them. So I'll go back to my first slide. So today I wanted to talk to you about the PE teacher's motivating and demotivating style and how it relates to student outcomes. And I wanted to show you that it's important for PE teachers to rely more on a motivating style, so autonomy, support, and structure to the benefit of students' needs and motivation. And maybe to a lesser extent their physical activity, because as I mentioned in the first study, didn't find strong relations there. And in contrast, we want teachers not to rely on demotivating styles, control and chaos, because it's detrimental for their needs and their motivation as well. And I want to thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, other thoughts, remarks, ideas, please let me know. Thank you. I'll first take a step.
Tell me a little bit more about study 5, the longitudinal. Did you say that you've got 1 wave of teacher style data and 2 waves of student motivation?
We have all 3 variables on T1 and T2.
Okay, and teacher variable and the teacher? So you've got, the teacher style is based on the students' ratings, and you've got that at time 1 and time 2.
Yeah.
And so you're going to look at some sort of cross-like panel model, which it's quite conceivable that it goes both ways.
Yeah, we first thought about that as well, but then I think that it's more likely that it is indeed in the direction I suggested. So that's why we wanted to do the other analysis, because I don't know if it's possible to do all the analysis we want to do. As a sample size is quite small, so I don't know if with cross-select we can do what we want to do.
And
Yeah.
Cross-like is the obvious analysis, and
Okay.
and if in fact you're right that it's only one direction, then
Yeah.
that will probably show that, and that's a nice finding.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In study 3, why you didn't include chaos?
Yeah. It's a good question. Yeah, we didn't ask the student about it, but the reason why we didn't is because at that time we were more focused on the other 3 styles, as we think that we first wanted to present the idea before going into more detail, because we thought what is sometimes a bit difficult is these styles are highly correlated to one another. And we first wanted to see if there was indeed a discrepancy between profiles. And I think if you include chaotic style, then these styles are, maybe you can go to the slide of study 3. It's a bit higher. This one. Yeah, this one. 19. Yes. Okay. So here, you see now we have like 3 styles that you want to do a 4th. There have been now, so later, studies that have done that, but then you see that control and chaos always lies on the same end. And we wanted to first see if what controls does before we included chaos. Sometimes it's difficult because they are highly correlated to find differences.
I think that's an important point because like you see in study 2, that you included chaos in the model in study 2, then the effect of the control study 2 of predicting some other outcome is disappeared because chaos predicted the outcome.
Definitely. You know, it's true. I think chaos is more detrimental even than control. And we need more research on that because chaos is and we did it too. We didn't include it, and I think we definitely need more research on that. So yeah, it's actually a good point.
If I'm understanding the profile analysis is based upon only 5 teachers.
Mhm.
Can't you do the profile? I mean, that makes it a kind of an exploratory sort of thing. I mean, that has no power. Okay, there's 2 things. One is that a good test of a profile model is you've got 4 scores making up the profiles. A good test of the profiles is do the profiles predict more than the 4 scores on their own? That's a good test, and whether it does or not, it has some important implication. The other thing though is that can't you do that profile analysis with some of your other studies where you've got enough teachers where it's reasonable to do?
Probably yes, but yeah, we haven't done that so far. I think it would be especially interesting if we have all the styles. So if we have like with the circumplex model, if we have like all the 8 styles. So I think we can do that with another data set. However, for this one, we were especially interested in the student perception. And we also wanted to see, because it's just in my opinion, I find it interesting if there was a difference between students or do they agree more. And that is what we see also with that 3rd study is, yes, there are only 5 teachers, but there were a high number of students. And so we had a lot of students taught by the same teacher, and we still could find different profiles. And I think that's interesting in itself.
If they're different controlling for the component parts, I think that's true. So that's what Herb's suggesting, is that you compare them while controlling for need support and control, and the 3rd one, need support and structure. Control for all 3 of those things. And if they still differ, although as Herb's saying, there's probably not enough power for that. If you had enough power and you compared them controlling for those 3 things, that would be a really good test of the additional predictive utility of your profiles.
Just sort of a general question about your samples. To what extent, or do you know to what extent they overlap? Because I'm just curious as to whether that would impact things in some of your later studies if you've got the same participants in them. I'm just curious as to what extent they overlap, because you're asking these things all things at times.
I think the 3rd one is in collaboration with Spanish University, so that's a totally different sample than the first 2 were, I think, from the same data set, but I should double check that. And then the last 2 are also from the same data set. But we've done
You've got a lot of overlap in the measures. It'd be useful to put all the data together and treat it. It's almost like a meta-analysis, but it's much stronger than a meta-analysis because you've got all the individual students. I understand the measures aren't parallel across the different measures, but a lot of them are.
Yeah, there have been a few difference in measures because the measure have been slowly developed. So for instance, circumplex is pretty new, so we had to first catch up with those measurements. But yeah, that's definitely a good suggestion.
So 3 things. So first, because I don't think anybody said it. Well done.
Good job.
You should not take the number of questions you're getting.
Number of questions like a positive.
5 studies in a PhD, especially. So 2 questions. The first is study 4, which I know is interested about. You mentioned right at the beginning how differences in PA are largely explained just by what
Mhm.
the kids are doing in class, so what lesson or
Yeah.
activity they're engaging in. Are you adjusting for that in study 4? Because I know when we've done studies looking at observations and trying to relate it to kids' PA, or even just trying to measure kids' PA in PE, the biggest confounding factor is the fact that like, some kids are doing gymnastics and some
Yeah.
lessons. Like, they're all the same kids in the same class doing the same lesson. And you pretty rapidly run out of observations that are on different lesson types.
Mhm.
So are you able to adjust for that? Do you have that data?
In study 1, we controlled for the lesson topic, and that's what we indeed found is that the lesson topic explained more of their physical activity than their teaching style did. So we did that. However, how we did it is we divided the subjects into 4 categories because previous research has used those 4 categories. So that's how we did it, and that's how we wanted to do it now as well.
In study 4?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the second question was, I can't get past the fact that observer ratings of teacher style are more or less unrelated to student observations. of
Yeah.
teacher style. That's super, I think it's super interesting. I don't know that it's a problem. I just kind of think it's super interesting. Because one kind of infers that you need to change what teachers do, and the other infers that you need to somehow get students to recognize what teachers are actually doing. And those are very different things, and one's probably easier to change than the other. I'm wondering just like what your thoughts are on that. What does that indicate to you, and how you address this?
Yeah, I'm super interested in that. I really want to do a study where we compare the teacher's own perception with the student's perception and with observers, because I want to get more information out of that because I think the literature isn't clear about that. So I'm glad you asked the question when it comes to observation and then students' perception. I think they do tell different things. And for instance, in the study that we did, we didn't find a lot of convergence. However, in the limited studies that are available, observations normally relate more closely to students' perception than they do to teachers' perception. And we have now a sample which we have all 3, so it's observations, teachers, and students. And there we see a similar thing. So observations rely more closely to students' perception than they do to teachers' perception. But it is a different thing. What it really means, I don't know yet because there isn't enough research on that topic, I think.
But like,
Yeah.
like if I was to guess, and you've got a bunch of experts here, probably do better than guessing. If I was to guess, like teachers are human, right, and they interact differently with different students, and so it could just
Yeah.
like my wife is a teacher, and she 100% has faults. All teachers do that, and I'm
Yeah.
very sure that her teaching style is slightly better to those students.
Yeah.
Kid who always making that, and so there are probably these person level different, student level differences.
Yeah.
That impact on how the teacher. And so I wonder if what we really need is an observation framework that
Yeah.
focuses on observation. So there's this
Student
Yeah.
teacher interactions instead of an observation. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a tool called SOPHI, which is how they measure physical activity.
Yeah.
It's done on just a small subset of students. For this exact reason, you sort of don't want to observe lots of
Yeah.
just kind of want to observe how one kid can observe less than this. But I'm sure John Marshall's got that's really
Okay, let's go Teresa, then back to her. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's actually research, I think, PhD looked at classroom management, etc. And there's always the same debate between looking at teachers, so irrespective of just in general lessons, between the teacher perceptions of themselves and the students' perceptions of themselves. And teachers, there is research by a Dutch group. So one of the guys is called Perry Denrock, and he has some research on the distinction between these. And teachers tend to overestimate themselves.
Yeah.
So they always think they're better at what they do than the students that perceive them. So there is some result that's to be referred to.
Yeah.
And some research. And so we've heard lots of our research on student evaluations. I've heard always that he'll do it himself. I know because I saw his hand go on. He'll love to talk about the difference between student observations and student ratings and observations and the differences.
There's a huge literature on university student evaluations on student ratings of teachers, teachers' ratings of themselves, and observer ratings. And mostly the observer ratings don't agree very well with the student ratings or the teacher rating, and multiple observers don't agree with each other.
Yeah.
And they don't even, they agree with a given observer has reasonably high agreement over time. But if you have multiple observers, there's almost no agreement.
Yeah.
With the students and teachers, it's a really interesting one in that the first time the teacher evaluates themselves, the student teacher agreement isn't very high, but as they get used to using the questionnaire, so these are teachers that are evaluated every semester over years. And after they've been evaluated a couple of times, the student teacher agreement goes up. And also there's reasonable support for a multi-trait, multi-method analysis, so that there's not only convergent validity, but there's also discriminant validity.
Yeah, I've seen a few studies indeed on that, but I think it hasn't been done within SDT as much, so that's why I wanted to go some more into detail just about the teaching or the motivating and demotivating stats. But I think I know what you're talking about. I just think it's, to me, not yet clear, especially within SDT, what it really wants us to say.
Do you have multiple observers per class?
Yes and no. Well, yeah. For instance, for the last study, no, it's the fourth study. I observed all of the lessons, but for the inter-rater reliability, we have a few videos, of course, that are coded by a second coder. And then when we initially tested the observations, then again, I coded all of the videos. And then there were 3 other ones who coded each a third.
So what's the inter-rater reliability?
It's pretty high, but it's, I think, because we did a really intense training beforehand. Yeah, you need that training, otherwise it's more over the place. Because what we've done, well, we don't know yet what to do with the results, or with what we've done is we've in a qualitative study, we presented videos of different PE teachers to students, to teachers, and to experts, and just asked them, the teacher in this video, do you think he or she is motivating and demotivating, and why? So it was a think out loud interview. And there you could, even the experts didn't always agree on what they saw. So I think it's really interesting to see, but it also makes it really complex to how we want to, what we want to do with that data.
So in teacher instructional, you also find that it always depends on what they're doing. So classroom management, and that's an example. There's quite high agreement. But if you go into what they call cognitive activation, one of them is large, is really between students and teachers. And the classroom management always appears as one of the easiest or the clearest, apparently, for both sides of it, while others are different. So it's really interesting to see if you find differences depending on which aspect you just have to look at.
Yeah, that's what I'm definitely interested in. Where is there a style that they maybe are more in agreement than another style, or behaviors, even if you can be more specific about them? So I think there's a lot in there. For instance, as Sarah said, like observations should be observed more student-teacher interaction than on a whole. But again, with like student perceptions, how does it come that, for instance, I see my teacher as controlling, and the same student see the teacher maybe as more autonomy supportive, or they're maybe my own motivation is like predictor of how I perceive my teacher, or I don't know, maybe because I'm a girl, I see him as more controlling. I don't know. So yeah.
What's the age of the participants?
What?
The age?
It's all in secondary school, so it's between, I think, 11 and 19.
To be able to differentiate autonomies for the controlling behaviors.
Yeah.
It's interesting because they did it. It's terrible. Another question.
I'm just curious about your opinion that how do in your opinion, whose perception is the most important among the three?
I don't really like the question. Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of different opinions about that. So I try not to express my opinion about it. I do think that, for instance, because I'm really interested in what a teacher does for the students. So, and in relation to students' outcomes, I think that students' own perceptions are more correlated to, or more, there's a strong relation with their own outcomes. So my opinion might be the students' perception that is the most important. However, I do think we can learn a lot about the observations and teachers as well. But in my opinion, and my PhD, it's more for the students. So I think those observations and teachers' perceptions should be examined to the use or to the benefit of students' outcomes.
Final question. Thanks, Herb.
Be interesting taking the question to split your class in half. And I have one for the predictors and the other half for the outcomes. Because obviously you have a bias when you have the same people judging the motivation style and the outcomes. So you could, with the L2, with the multi-level model, you could split it in half and come up with the profiles with one half and predict outcomes based on the other half. You could probably some of the studies you have a large enough end to do that. A final question is, so much of this research is done with physical education, amazing done with physical education. And I suspect that at least some of these findings, in fact, many of these findings are idiosyncratic to physical education.
They might not apply consistently across subjects.
You mean again with like the lesson topic, like, or do you mean with other like, do you mean within physical education, or do you mean with other teachers like English?
Taking this paradigm and looking at mathematics classes.
Yeah, I think, of course, yeah, for physical activity, during a mathematics class, they will all be seen,
I'm
but
talking about the outcome of physical activity. I'm talking about, the motivating style and the profiles and so on and so forth.
yeah, I think that it's if we would do similar research with other teachers, I believe we would get similar results. However, I think we would also use different behaviors, for instance, to observe teachers, because some behaviors
Surely the motivating style would be fundamentally different. Math is very controlling relative to physical education. I look at my wife, who's an art teacher, and her art teacher's natural style is autonomy supportive. And they're off the scale even without any intervention relative.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that especially in PE, because of this, students are active, are running all over the place. Teachers tend to become controlling due to that environment. So I don't know if mathematics teachers would be more controlling than a PE teacher in that sense.
And even if they are, maybe that's why people change it.
I'm not saying it should be.
Oh, so we have data. Well,
Oh, yeah.
I teach was done with PE maths, and they did observations. So
Were they more controlling? Did you ever Yeah, interesting.
All right. Thank you very much. Please give a round of applause to Nele. Thank you. Thank you. So we've got a baby, keep talking. We've got a baby shower in 10 minutes. You want to sing happy birthday to Arnie?